Yeah, I think it's a funny one. You made a very valid point at the very start there, Dave, that you would potentially have some people who are only just getting started very much now in their whole, I suppose, exercise science or their S&C journey in general. So they've either come to the sport or they've been playing in a particular sport quite like relatively late, or they've only started really experiencing an awful lot of actual S&C exposure or athletic performance exposure in their as they're getting closer to college nearly. So it's actually the whole thing is very new to them. Whereas you might have other people who would be almost kind of mid-career in a tech tact kind of scenario, or they've been in other industries and now they're coming back into it and they have a huge other level of exposure. So they're coming in at different kind of stages and they have a different, I think they nearly have a different path to go in that first couple of years if they're in an undergrad and rather than a younger, more fresh kind of face, I suppose, to it. So I suppose the first one for the kind of the newer person to the whole thing, I definitely think there's a couple of ways to really approach it, like making really, really good. This obviously sounds somewhat generic, but like making the really good friends is a
Mm.
huge part because they're going to make a big difference throughout the time you're there in the particular area. And later on, you're going to probably end up coming back and dealing with a lot of those people for either various jobs. You're going to cross their paths as it goes along in different sports or different teams and in different guises. And one of the big things that you'll find is there'll be in a lot of, I suppose, a lot of colleges, universities, etc., and third level institutions. There's a lot of different strands that you can break off into as you go further into the actual course. So initially, there's going to be that broad overview on a lot of different parts, and even into the second year, that can usually be the same again. And then once you start breaking into third year, into fourth year, masters, PhD stuff, much more narrow scenarios and much more specified types of actual subject matter. But initially, you're going to get so much exposure to so many different things that it really, really does help to actually make sure that you go, okay, well, actually, if you're making new friends and then finding out what they're into and using them as you'll be ending up using them quite a lot or interacting with them as buddy systems for certain fitness tests or for whatever it is. So you'll end up actually figuring out, okay, well, I'm able to use these nearly as individual case studies as well. And taking note of those kind of pieces will help a little bit with just relating to the actual studies that you're doing and subject matter that you're dealing with. So I think that's a big one. And then probably a lot of it would be a lot of these type of students will actually just be playing lots of sports or they're playing certain sports and stuff like this in the college and taking ownership of different clubs and taking ownership of different groups and having to really work on I suppose the nearly the sports management or the team environment or even the individual performance environment depending on what type of sport it is, if it's boxing, if it's rugby, if it's whatever. And I think a lot of those skills can be really honed very, very well at that in the first couple of years, and then really built on when you're actually out on placement or you're working with different individual athletes later on in your later degree and into your masters, etc. So I think that can be a huge, huge part of it. But what's your thoughts on those, Dave, so far?
Yeah, 100%. I think it's a good point that people come into sports science, strength and conditioning degrees with different backgrounds. The majority will have come through traditional, leaving cert CA route, but there are people that are returning to education and they will have different needs. And there's people that have been working within sport or clinical or community based or private industry based jobs, and they're using the degree then to upskill from there. So the advice, I think it's good to, as you say, understand that it's important to build those social sports, those structures, and try to do it as best you can because it will make a big difference in terms of your college experience. And we don't always want to be talking about, the education side of stuff. There is a lot more to college life than just the education. In terms of though the advice that I tend to give to people who are entering sports science, and a lot of the apprehension would be, oh, is there a job at the end of it? What can I do to make sure I get a job? I'll go into that in a second because there's a talk I give to first years for the last couple of years around this kind of making the best of your degree in terms of increasing your chance of employment at the end. But the first thing I would say entering these degrees is to have an open mind. A lot of time we enter sports science or we enter strength and conditioning with these pre-held notions of where we think we want to be or what success looks like. And people think that success is being on the sideline now with the Ireland team at the Rugby World Cup or working in that high performance environment. And that's where they're laser focused from when they go in. But you have to, sports science degrees are good that you get exposed to biomechanics, psychology, physiology on both health, clinical and performance-based environments then as well. Be open to those, be open to all those different strands, because what you value or what you find interesting at 17, 18 when you come into college may not be what you find interesting at 21, 22 as you mature over those couple of years. So be open-minded to all these different experiences. If though you are entering college and you're determined and you're saying, no, I want to make sure that I'm someone that gets a job at the end of the degree in the industry that I want to be in, I always say there's three kind of prongs to that I talk about, and it's what you know, who you know, and who knows you. And they're the three elements that you should be kind of focusing on. And when I talk about what you know, what makes a successful individual, what you know is important, that you're actually a good practitioner, that you know what the hell you're doing. And you do that by a couple of ways. You study hard, you engage in the lectures, you actually attend the lectures. You'd be surprised at the correlation between attendance and grades, but you attend them, you engage then as much as you can and learn the material. Now, sports science, strength and conditioning, it's an applied field. You can only really learn and get this tacit knowledge by being out in the field. So that is gain experience, get coaching earlier. Even if coaching is not what you want to do, gaining that experience of, speaking in public, dealing with large groups, management, logistics, they're all invaluable skills, even from building your own confidence and interpersonal abilities. Because, if you can deal with a well-resourced South Dublin tennis club, but also go down to, the middle of nowhere in Mayo or Sligo or somewhere and deal with a real rural club, you can be a social chameleon. You can blend into these different social environments. So that's important. And people say, oh, well, where do I get the experience? Anywhere. People think, oh, only experience at the elite level is worth anything. Coach anywhere, volunteer anywhere. Your lecturers, your universities will likely bring a lot of internship opportunities and volunteer opportunities throughout your years. Volunteer for them all. It doesn't matter what it is. As much as you can feasibly do, volunteer for them all and get involved in them. Your local sports club in your area will, whatever your team is, if you play in with a local sports club, maybe volunteer with the age grades below you. Maybe if you play GA, you volunteer with local soccer club. There's plenty of stuff that you can be doing. And don't feel like you need to know really what you're at. All these clubs, thrive on volunteer coaches that are trying their best. So once you're going in with good intention and you don't oversell what you do and you don't work outside your scope, you will be fine. But, shadow, get involved with these clubs. And most GA clubs now have an S&C coach to some degree that you can go in and shadow. So that's the first prong, and it's what you know is important, and be a good practitioner. The second I talk about is who you know. And it's, nepotism is alive and well in every industry. And people, when they see CVs come in or opportunities, they tend to, talk to people that they know might be good and suggest maybe you should apply for that. These people are looking. So you build that. That's difficult to build as a student starting out. So having social media profiles is good, but engaging, but nice, clean, professional. They don't have to be robotic. Hell, you're 18, 19 years of age. But, maybe have a Twitter account, LinkedIn. And if you see practitioners, ask some questions about it, about what they're doing. Oh, that's interesting. Why do you do that? If you see Eamon Flanagan with his new recent MedBall book, download it and share it and say, I really like this element or this section and this is why I liked it. Engage with these individuals so that when your name comes in, they're like, oh yeah, I know that person. They're always commenting and they're really enthusiastic on social media. Your lecturers in sports science courses and S&C courses tend to be embedded with teams and athletes. They have a huge network themselves. Engage with your lecturers. Coming to the lecture and engaging with them first and foremost tends to make the lecturers like you. So they look more favorably on you. So engage with them to help build up this network and ask them, is there anything I should be looking into, any maybe events I should be going to, any resources I should be checking out? that kind of thing. And then the final thing, as I said, is who you know is important, but then who knows you? And this is kind of similar, but it's, do the people that do the hiring know you? Do the people that actually are decision makers know you? And this again is by, if you get these intern opportunities, you do the best you can them. You engage with the right people, and also reverse engineer. What roles would you like to have? Identify people that are in similar roles where you would like to be, and go onto their LinkedIn, and reverse engineer it. What did they do? You'll be surprised with the journey people take to get to where they are, and it's so varied. But you start to reverse engineer it, and you see, okay, they went there, so it gives you an idea of what it takes to get to their position. But then you can engage with those people in the same way, and engage with other people in the network, that when it comes to applying for jobs, people know you. And as I said, people knowing you and who you know might get you in the door. Being a good practitioner then when you get in there is what keeps you in that door. So you need to be able to walk the walk when you get the opportunity. So again, a lot of people realize this in fourth year, and they start networking in fourth year. It has to be done from first year or second year. You really need to start building out quickly. So, and get involved in research studies, volunteer, because people move around. When you reverse engineer on LinkedIn, you'll see God to work with every organization. So if you have a PhD student that's doing a research study and you volunteer for them in first year, who knows where they'll be in 4 years? Maybe, working with a team in the Premier League, maybe somewhere else. And then when you get onto them, it's like, oh, remember times I volunteered for all your studies? Could you put in a good word for me for that internship or this?
100%.
Comes around.
Yeah, I think there's a big one there you mentioned, and that's where it becomes starting earlier with the process of figuring out, okay, well, what are the actual key assets that are going to be very helpful for me longer term, rather than just going, okay, well, I only, and like this, I think one of the big ones would be an identification of what your level of ambition is early on makes a big difference to it, because once you start going, okay, at the very start, you might be like, okay, I want to try and get to an international team, blah, 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 which is fine. Now, that's probably relatively accessible within a couple of years if you're a strong enough practitioner and you're fairly switched on, and like you said there, some of the right people. You could get a development age grade team quite quickly, and then you're there. So whether you want to get to international senior teams, etc., that's a bit of a different vibe. And even still, if you want to get to that stage, but by that stage, then you're very much a different kind of an animal, and it's a much bigger MDT. You're dealing with an awful lot of different logistic issues and a hugely limited time frame, probably with an awful lot of these athletes or these actual people. So initially, on identifying quickly enough what level of ambition you want, and whether it's to actually impact the most amount of athletes or players or people, rather than, okay, well, I only want to work with this particular team at this particular time. And that's a very finite scenario, because they could get the boot if the manager changes or whatever it is. You're like, right, well, I spent 6 months there and that moved. But a big one then as a flip side of that. So you might have really strong ambition, like you want to be really dedicated, you want to be a super practitioner, you want to work on all the soft skills, etc., and you're really looking at your potential intern options, etc. But if you're not reflecting on how you're actually doing throughout, and consistent self-reflection and consistent awareness of, okay, where am I actually at? How am I managing compared to my vision board? Am I actually on the right track here? Do I need to adjust a bit and go, okay, well, right, I want to start doing a lot more performance analysis or things like this. Right now, I need Power BI. No matter what happens, now I need to start looking at graphic design. Now I need to start looking at different analytical studies, and you start adjusting your mentality. And that now, something like that would immediately open up other doors for work with teams. All of this is going to be more of an option. Or you start working, like you said, in a bit more of a clinical setting, or a special needs setting, or a diversity inclusion setting. Like, the potential is huge if you just analyze, okay, am I actually enjoying this, and am I making good progress in this? Is this more of within my aptitude? Am I really actually built for this? Okay, great. Maybe not. I'm actually not enjoying it as much as I was. Should I change tact a bit? It doesn't mean you have to change the whole thing. It just means you have to make sure that you're analyzing quite well as you go through the whole process. Right, what do I actually want to get out of this? And building those little blocks in the early days of, okay, well, I'm going to really, if you have you're obviously going to come into these kind of situations, probably with a relatively, I suppose, maybe a handful of specific interests. So you might go, right, I play GAA or I play soccer or something like that, and female or male, it doesn't really matter. And there's a particular interest in, like, okay, well, I really like, I was a very fast player. I am a very fast player. So then I want to focus on the speed development or whatever it was. Or then, well, actually, no, do you know what? I've done a lot of cross country. So now I'm going to end up looking at the endurance element or whatever it is. Or when they work with team sports or team athletes or whatever it is, there's a much more significant narrowing. And then you go, okay, well, if that is something of interest, then that is an initial point of interest for your actual third year project, that your actual master's. Like, this is a significant option to go with. But could that, like you mentioned earlier on, could that be brought back into a club setting to test it, to see where you're actually, to really check and see, do you have an MVP? Do you have an actual minimum viable product to potentially leave when you leave? You have these other little operations kind of working away in the background. I think one of the biggest challenges will be, like you said, about the job scenario. There can be a job scenario, or there can be an actual, as a business person, you're coming out and you have to be very savvy with an awful lot of social skills. You're going to have to do lots of interviews. You're going to have to do lots of actual building out your CV, your cover letters, etc., and going to networking and actually asking the right questions and dealing with these people. And if you don't start building up those skills early on, you're under considerable pressure. So I think one of the biggest ones would be figuring out what level of ambition you might have as you go further and further into the course, and then just consistent self-reflection to analyze, are you actually making good progress where you want to be? Do you need to double down on certain elements every so often, and then just kind of re-crack the whip,
Yeah, and I think that's important. And when you view the course as a whole, that, I mean, by merit you go to college, you're making the assumption that you don't know it all, that you're there to learn, and those skill sets that you learn, yes, the technical skills are important, but it's those broad transferable skills that we talk about that will never come back to fail you in terms of, people talk about, oh, I learned maths, when do I ever use algebra or what this and yes, there's the skills like that, but say in sports science, do I want someone that's really proficient at doing lactate testing? Yes, I do, but I can teach someone that reasonably easy. Same with most of the technical tests. Now, you should be really good at them all, but what's few and far between? People who are fantastic public speakers, people that are fantastic logistical managers, that they're organized in terms of setting up scheduling and all this, and they're really on top of that, and to have the interpersonal skills. That if I have someone that can come out and get up and speak to a group of people, take information, translate it to them, organize it, visualize it well, those type of skills will never be a negative or drawback. Developing 100%. Your ability to speak, developing your ability to communicate will never hinder you. It can only be a positive thing that can be applied across multiple different industries.